The courtroom in Magnolia County held its breath. Then, without warning, the doors exploded open. A German shepherd, soaked from storm and streaked with red Georgia mud, bounded down the center aisle, clenched in his jaws, a sealed plastic pouch. The judge's gavel froze midair. Gasps broke from the gallery. Attorneys stumbled to their feet. But it was what happened after the dog appeared that shattered everything they thought they knew. 70 miles away, Marcus Mark Daniels lay strapped to a gurney in Magnolia Penitentiary's execution wing. The steel cuffs around his wrists were polished smooth by time and tension. Overhead, 4 lines hung like silent threats, each one labeled with its deadly payload. A low hum buzzed from the fluorescent lights. Then, total darkness. Power across the entire prison blinked out. In a second, every circuit surrendered to black. A backup lamp flickered above Daniels, casting his wrist in blood-red light. He wasn't there to die. Not yet. It was supposed to be a simple pre-countdown weight check. But now, alarms howled, blast doors slammed, and somewhere overhead a transformer blew like a warhead. The 4th tray trembled. Panic stung his nerves. The warden and her 2 guards froze, unable to explain why both the main and backup grids failed at once. No one moved. Then the emergency landline, wired only to the governor's office, began to ring. Warden Orman picked it up. Mark could see the blood drain from her face. "Who is this?" she said, barely above a whisper. A beat. That can't be right. The dog is still 70 miles out. Her eyes found his. It was the first time he'd ever seen her afraid. Before she could speak again, a secondary lockdown door slammed shut, sealing them in. Chaos bloomed outside. Radios crackled, boots pounded concrete, sensors tripped in the archive vault. Something, or someone, had broken into the restricted records wing. Mark could only lie there, 4 needles poised above his veins, helpless. Questions battered his thoughts. Who hit the power? Why mention Ranger, his old K-9 partner? What could be hidden in those records worth sabotaging an entire prison? The medic beside him trembled, her gloved hand hovering between syringes and silence. Then, just as suddenly, the power surged back. Lights screamed to life, but the doors didn't open, and the phone rang again. Far to the south, the storm still raged. At a creaking farmhouse in Cypress Hollow, Henrietta, Hen Price, cursed at the thunder. Her front porch groaned beneath the weight of rain. Inside, a black and tan shepherd paced like a soldier waiting orders, his breath fogging the window pane. Henrietta dried her hands and eyed the dog. "You feel that, don't you, boy?" "Something's coming, huh?" Ranger stopped. Ears up, body tense. He already knew. Ranger whined low, his gaze locked on the worn canvas duffel by the door. The one Henrietta kept packed, just in case the state ever called. She always joked it would never happen. But tonight, something in the wind had changed. The phone rang. One look at the caller ID made her stomach twist. "This is Detective Karen Brooks with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation," the voice said. "I'm calling on behalf of Warden Orman. Inmate Marcus Daniels has asked for a final K-9 visitation. You and Ranger need to report to Magnolia Penitentiary within 90 minutes. Henrietta's knees nearly buckled. 90? Lord in heaven. "You'll have a police escort," Brooks added. "Do not stop. For anyone." The line went dead. Hen pressed a hand over her chest, trying to catch her breath. Ranger barked once, sharp, certain. "I guess we're going then," she murmured, grabbing the duffel and her keys. 15 minutes later, her old pickup was fishtailing down muddy roads, windshield wipers slapping back and forth like panicked metronomes. Ranger rode shotgun, his nose nearly pressed to the dash, eyes burning with silent focus. Blue lights flickered in her mirrors, 2 cruiser escorts behind her, slicing through the storm. Then her headlights caught it. A stalled box truck across both lanes, hazard lights dead. No driver in sight. The lead cruiser braked hard, spotlight swinging toward the back of the truck. The cargo doors were chained, but they rocked unnaturally. Henrietta's breath caught. A deputy exited, gun drawn, stepping carefully into the downpour. On the radio, road might be washed out. "We'll check," Ranger growled. Deep, instinctive. Henrietta reached to calm him, but he bolted upright, ears pinned back, stare fixed on the tree line. A figure stepped out from the brush. Black poncho, ski mask, AR-15, muzzle flash. The deputy spun, hit mid-chest, screams, gunfire, tires shrieking on soaked clay. Hen ducked behind the wheel as Ranger leapt across her lap, slamming into the passenger door. His roar cut through thunder. Hen's mind raced. Ambush. Not for her. Not for the cruisers. They wanted the dog. She threw the truck in reverse as bullets tore through the windshield. Glass shattered across the seat like icy confetti. Ranger snarled, claws raking the dash, desperate to reach the shooter. The second cruiser skidded sideways, clipping her bumper. Her truck spun 180 degrees, rocketing back the way it came. Ranger braced himself, eyes wild. In the rear view, she glimpsed masked men hauling the wounded deputies toward the truck. No signs of looting, no panic, just cleanup. Then she saw it. A faded patch on a poncho sleeve. Pax Core. Hen's knuckles went white on the wheel. "Damn it all. They're bought men," she spat. "Hold tight, Ranger. We're leaving the road." She yanked the wheel hard and gunned it into a Forest Service trail. Branches lashed the sides. Darkness closed in. But at least in the woods, they could vanish. Engines snarled somewhere behind them. Closer now. The trail narrowed to a ragged trench, swallowed by pine and shadow. Henrietta had one destination in mind: the old Firewatch Tower. It stood deep in the woods, long abandoned, but once used by Mark and Ranger during K-9 training drills. If they could reach it and contact Ava Patel, there was a chance, just maybe, they could get a warning out before the prison was breached again, before everything unraveled. But the odds were bad. Fuel hovered near empty. Visibility was down to mud-streaked flashes between trees, and whoever was behind this wasn't afraid to kill. Ranger barked. 2 clipped notes, a signal, urgency, alert. Henrietta gritted her teeth, eyes flicking to the dashboard. The pickup groaned around a bend, its shocks whimpering. Miles away, inside Magnolia Penitentiary's administrative wing, Ava Patel ushered Mark Daniels, still in shackles, into a dim records room. Battery-powered emergency lights cast the walls in pulses of devil red. Sirens had gone silent, but lockdown remained absolute. "I need that terminal," Ava muttered, slamming a USB stick into the lone active workstation. "If I can upload the store camera footage before the reboot, Reed won't be able to bury it." Mark stood watch at the doorway, tense even with chains at his ankles. Guards ran past in a frenzy, focused on perimeter control. No one noticed a supposedly condemned man moving freely inside the heart of the records wing. On screen, the upload bar crawled. 2%, 3%. Rain hammered the roof above like incoming fire. Then, footsteps. Measured. Purposeful. Mark's spine stiffened. Detective Karen Brooks stepped into view. Her soaked GBI uniform clung to her frame, a flashlight in one hand and a sealed evidence satchel in the other. "Records wing unsecured," she said lightly. "Power's out. Mind if I join you?" Ava didn't answer, her jaw set like stone. Brooks's gaze flicked to the monitor, 6%, then to Mark. "I brought a sworn affidavit," she continued. "A witness just confessed. Says he lied under oath. Said Sheriff Reed paid him to place Daniels at the scene." Ava blinked. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Brooks pulled a folded document from the satchel and offered it. Mark's pulse thudded. Maybe, just maybe, she was trying to help. Ava took the paper. Their fingers brushed. The detective's skin was ice cold. Ava's eyes dropped to Brooks's sleeve. Barely visible under the red light was a smear of something thick and blue. Resin. Ava knew that color. PaxCor's modified pine. Only 3 groves in the entire state produced it. Her stomach turned cold. Why would Brooks have that? 12% now. The upload ticked on. Brooks's smile edged wider. You all right, counselor? You look like you've seen a ghost. Ava steadied her voice. It's been a long night. But something was terribly wrong. Tell me about it, Brooks said, her flashlight sweeping lazily over the cabinets, then snapping off with a click. The room sank into near-total blackness, save for the faint glow from the monitor. The upload bar inched forward, 14%. Mark tensed. Detective, he asked cautiously, how exactly did both generators fail? Brooks didn't hesitate. Lightning strike. That's what they're saying. Her tone curled with amusement. But funny thing, lightning doesn't usually hit 2 separate transformers, unless someone's asking it to. She tapped a filing cabinet with her knuckles, like it was part of a game. The sound echoed like warning drums, in a crypt. Ava's heart thumped harder. She turned the affidavit under the monitor light. Everything looked official, watermarked, notarized, too perfect. It felt like bait. If Ava submitted a forged statement, their entire appeal would implode. And if it was real, why now? She glanced at Mark. His look said exactly what she was thinking. Don't trust her. Shouts echoed down the corridor. Boots thundered. Someone yelled about a breach at the outer fence. Brooks's radio crackled with static on her hip. Intrusion detected. Northern sector. Surveillance offline. Brooks muted it, without a blink. Well, I'll leave you two to it, she said smoothly, stepping toward the doorway. Oh, Daniels, word is your dog's en route. Better hope he makes it before the needle does. Mark clenched his jaw. Ava offered a strained smile. Thank you for the document. Brooks gave a slow wink and vanished into the dark hall. The second she was gone, Ava snapped into motion. She scanned the affidavit's notary stamp, Fulton County, but yesterday had been a state holiday. The notary office? Closed. She's setting us up, Ava hissed. Or testing us, Mark added grimly. Either way, the blue smear on Brooks's sleeve wasn't coincidence. Ava had spent weeks studying PaxCor's synthetic tree resin. Only those involved in that operation would be marked with it. She yanked the USB upload aborted at 18%, but the file was intact. She stuffed it deep into her boot. Alarms changed pitch, a deeper, more guttural sound. The window shutters slammed shut. Ava's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. One text from an unknown number. They're coming for the dog. If he doesn't get inside, he dies. She stared at the message, then looked at Mark. They're hunting Ranger. His face went pale. 2 years earlier, the courtroom had erupted when Ranger burst through the doors with a piece of evidence no one knew existed. That glove had saved them once. Now it might be their only chance again. But only if Ranger made it in time. Judge Benson stood, her robe fanning behind her like startled wings. Order in the court, she barked, but the room had already exploded. Ava's brain juggled between 2 instincts, lawyer logic, which screamed improper chain of custody, and handler instinct, which whispered trust, the dog. She chose the second. Using her thumbnail, she sliced open the evidence pouch Ranger had delivered. Inside, a left-handed nitrile glove. The fingertips smeared with something sticky and blue. Ava's breath hitched. Mark leaned forward from the defense table, voice catching. That glove, Your Honor, it's real. The dog, he's trained for scent-specific recovery. He was my partner. Benson's eyes narrowed, skeptical. Then explain how a retired canine evaded courthouse security and produced an unlogged exhibit during trial. Henrietta stood abruptly in the gallery, voice raised above the chaos. I took Ranger to the lobby restroom, Your Honor. He slipped his leash, must have caught scent. A deputy moved to restrain the dog, but Ranger snapped his head around and growled low. Just once. Enough to freeze the man mid-step. Ava rose, her voice ringing like steel. This glove was never entered into evidence. Yet my client's dog found it inside a secure government building. The only logical conclusion? Something critical was hidden from this court. Jurors leaned in. Even the stenographer forgot her keys. Judge Benson gavelled again, but softer this time. Bailiff, call a recess, secure the evidence locker, and someone get that dog a bowl of water. Ranger sat, tail sweeping across the floor like a war banner. Ava dropped to one knee, hugging his neck, whispering praises in Pashto, the language they had trained with overseas. Ranger pressed into her, eyes shining. Mark wiped his eyes before the jury could see. In that moment, he knew. The tide had shifted, not victory, but a chance. That glove had delayed his conviction then. Maybe tonight. It could stop his execution. His shackled hands balled into fists. We need to warn Henrietta, he muttered. Ava was already one step ahead, tucking the affidavit into her coat. First, we get you out of lockdown, then we make the call. Boots pounded in the hall, coming fast. Mark braced for prison guards, but it wasn't staff. Two inmates in orange jumpsuits burst into view, panting, eyes wild. One gripped a sharpened toothbrush. The taller one sneered. Sheriff says you don't need to make it to Monday. We finish the job now. They lunged. Miles away, Henrietta bumped her pickup over a root-choked service road. Windshield cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Ranger stood firm on the dash, steady as the truck rocked. Rain slashed the forest. Engines still howled behind her, but she was close now. She could feel it. The tower had to be near. Please still be standing, Henrietta whispered as the battered truck burst into a clearing. And there it was. The Firewatch Tower, weather-worn and skeletal, rose like a defiant relic above the pines. 70 feet of rusted steel, with a tiny wind-battered cabin, clinging at the top. It had stood for decades. Tonight, it needed to stand one more time. She killed the headlights. The growl of pursuit still echoed in the woods, but for now, they were alone. Henrietta shoved open the door. Go, Ranger, up! The German shepherd leapt into the mud, paws splashing. She threw the duffel over her shoulder, snatched her old flip phone from the dash, and followed him onto the first graded step. The climb felt endless. Her knees screamed. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Halfway up, a rifle shot cracked the air. Glass shattered above. Hen ducked, and Ranger took off like lightning, disappearing into the shadows near the top. At the cabin platform, wind and rain surged through a broken window pane. Ranger stood at the far corner, ears swiveling. Hen ducked inside and slammed the hatch shut, jamming an iron rod through the handle. Only then did she call Ava. The lawyer answered on the second ring. Miss Price? I'm in the old tower. They ambushed the escort, killed a deputy. Her voice rasped. They're coming. Ava cursed under her breath. I'm stuck in admin. Brooks might be compromised. Don't trust any uniform. Don't let them take Ranger. Whatever's in his bag, protect it. Before Hen could answer, the signal died. She cursed and pocketed the phone. Rain pounded the roof. Thunder grumbled across the ridge. Below, headlights bobbed through the trees, 3 vehicles crawling along the muddy service trail. Hen turned to Ranger. It's just us, trooper. She unloaded the duffel, a flashlight, bottled water, and an old revolver. A .38 she'd kept loaded since her dispatcher days. 5 rounds. She checked the brass, snapped it shut, and flattened against the wall. Voices rose below. Orders barked in the storm. Then the unmistakable roar of a chainsaw. "They're planning to bring the tower down," Hen muttered. Ranger growled, low and steady. Then, boots on the stairs. Steel clanged under their weight, the sound growing closer. She aimed her revolver at the hatch. 5 bullets, 70 feet in the air. No way down, no radio, no backup. Just one determined woman, and a war dog who'd never lost a fight. The first silhouette rose into view, goggles glowing green. Henrietta fired. The first intruder recoiled as the bullet struck, tumbling backward into the man behind him. Ranger pounced, teeth flashed, flesh tore, screams followed. Hen pulled the trigger again. Click. Misfire. Her heart stalled. She thumbed the hammer, fired a 3rd time. The shot sparked off the stairs, ricocheting into the dark. Another shout. Someone had been bitten. Another lost his footing. She swung the duffel like a sledgehammer, smashing it into a helmet. The second attacker pitched through the hatch and crashed 2 stories below, with a metallic clang that shook the whole tower. The chainsaw below sputtered and died. Voices shouted, "Fall back! Fall back!" Vehicles revved in reverse. Tires spun in the mud. They weren't retreating in defeat. They were afraid the tower might collapse on them. Rain howled like a banshee. Wind tugged at the broken window. Hen slumped against the wall, revolver shaking in her grip. Ranger returned, his muzzle wet with blood and rain. She dropped to her knees, arms wrapping around him. "Good boy," she breathed, tears lost in the storm. But quiet didn't last. A new sound, soft and precise, pup, 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 echoed in the distance. Suppressor fire. Hen's eyes shot to the support beams. Bullets stitched across the legs of the tower. The structure groaned. They were trying to cripple it. She scrambled to the duffel. Beneath the towels and kibble was the real target, a sealed evidence pouch, holding that sticky, blue-smeared glove Ranger had sniffed out of Sheriff Reed's cruiser a week ago. She hadn't meant to bring it. Just habit. But now, it was the most dangerous thing in Georgia. They weren't just after the dog. They were after this. Hen stuffed the pouch inside her coat and zipped it tight. Then she dragged a folding chair to the shattered window. Outside, the Pax Corps mercenaries regrouped, searchlights sweeping the trees. She aimed her revolver and fired a warning shot through the broken pane. The crowd scattered. One of them shouted into a radio, "No sign of the dog. Tower unstable." Ranger barked twice, sharp, urgent. Hen froze. A new sound buzzed above the trees. Rotors, a drone, big, industrial, corporate. It crested the ridge like a metal hornet, searchlight blazing. Ranger lunged, but Hen held him by the collar. "Down, soldier." She waited. The drone hovered outside the window, its optical lens scanning. She lifted her revolver. Only 1 round left. She aimed, fired. The lens shattered. The drone spasmed, twitched, and then fell like a rock into the pine brush below, exploding in a shower of sparks. Flames licked up from the undergrowth despite the rain. The Pax Corps men yelled, scrambling to contain it. For a moment, they forgot about the tower. Henrietta slumped to the floor, revolver empty. Ranger pressed against her hip. The sky began to lighten. They had survived the ambush. But now, with fire below and enemies circling, the real battle was just beginning. "They're counting on us, boy," Henrietta whispered, staring down through the haze. Pine needles crackled beneath the flames. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. County fire, maybe state troopers, or maybe Reed's men, dressed in uniforms they didn't earn. Back at Magnolia Penitentiary, Mark Daniels ducked beneath a swing from a sharpened toothbrush. He caught the attacker's wrist, twisted hard, then drove his forehead straight into the man's nose. Crunch. The man reeled, blood gushing, but his partner, a lanky lifer known as Skier, whipped a padlock in a sock toward Mark's temple. Mark pivoted. The weapon glanced off his shoulder instead. His shackles slowed him, but instincts honed in. Afghanistan kicked in. He swept Skier's legs, sending the man tumbling. Ava Patel screamed for help, but alarms drowned her out. The emergency strobes pulsed like heartbeats across the cinderblock corridor. No guards came. Too many distractions. Too many fires set by Reed's bribes. Riots blooming like planned weeds. Mark snatched the toothbrush shiv from the floor and flung it down the hall. "Tell Reed," he hissed. "He should have sent real killers." The busted nose inmate spat blood. "Your evidence won't matter. You'll be dead before the judge sees it." He lunged again, only for Ava to sweep his knee out from under him. He hit the floor hard. She grabbed Mark's elbow. "Let's move." They ran, his chains clinking with every step. Water from the sprinklers soaked the tiles. Overhead, a robotic voice shouted lockdown protocols. "This way," Ava yelled, skidding into a side hallway. "Infirmary wing's got a phone." Then, "Daniels, Patel, stop Detective Brooks." She stood at the far end of the hall, soaked and seething, taser pistol in hand, her sleeve still stained with blue resin. "Hand over the USB," she said coldly. Ava slipped the drive from her boot, holding it out. "This? You mean proof of what your sheriff did?" Brooks didn't blink. "He's up for re-election. That USB ruins him. It ruins us. No one cares about an ex-handler on death row." Mark stepped in front of Ava. "Shoot me then. But burying this truth? It'll buy you 6 months of silence tops. Set me free, and Reed falls. Pax Corps loses everything." Brooks's eyes flicked to the dead security cam. She didn't reply. A tremor shook the floor, an explosion somewhere deep in the cell block. Sprinklers burst to life overhead again. Rust-colored water rained down. Brooks flinched. Mark charged. The taser snapped, but missed. He barreled into her. Ava lunged, grabbing the detective's wrist. The taser hit the ground. Brooks rolled, kicked, scrambled, but not fast enough. She snatched the USB from Ava's hand and bolted down a dark corridor. "She'll take it straight to Reed," Ava growled, hauling Mark to his feet. "We need to stop her." He nodded, breath ragged. "We need to get these cuffs off, now." Tool room, laundry wing. They limped through the sirens and steam, toward the only hope left in a prison full of traitors. The prison felt like it was sinking, into chaos, into fire, into the weight of every secret it had buried. Mark and Ava reached the maintenance cage near the laundry wing. It was padlocked. Mark rammed his shoulder into it. Metal shrieked but held. Ava grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and swung hard. Clang, pop. The latch snapped. Inside, shelves lined with rusted tools and forgotten parts. Mark spotted the bolt cutters instantly. He braced his wrist chains over a vice post. Ava clamped the cutters down. Clink. One link snapped, then the next. Blood welled where the cuffs had dug in, but Mark's arms fell free. He flexed his hands, wincing. Pain, yes, but also power. They grabbed radios, a flashlight, zip ties. Ava keyed one of the radios. Static, then a panicked voice. "Unit 9, yard breach. Unknowns in Pax Corps gear. Fire spreading near Timberline sector. We need county support." Mark and Ava exchanged a grim look. Henrietta. That signal was too close to the firewatch tower to be coincidence. "We need to call her," Ava said, sprinting to the infirmary. The wing was deserted, miraculously untouched by rioters or fire. Mark grabbed the wall-mounted phone. He punched in Henrietta's number. Busy. He tried again. Nothing. Ava slid to a nurse's workstation, fingers flying across keys. Cell towers near Breakneck Ridge are down, she muttered. Could be lightning or sabotage. Her eyes scanned weather data, satellite overlays. Heat signature matches the tower. Fire radius confirms it. Mark's stomach twisted. She's trapped. Footsteps pounded outside. Not guards. 3 armed figures swept past the infirmary entrance. No insignias, just matte armor, PAX Corps patches. Ava whispered, "Contract strike team. They're here to clean house. Brooks is just a loose thread to them now." Mark's voice dropped to a growl. "Then we take the thread back." They moved silently, tracking wet boot prints through flickering corridors. The trail led to a records alcove. There she was. Brooks, slumped at a desk, a laptop open, USB still loading. She didn't hear them. She was bleeding, hand clutching her side, blouse dark with blood. The same strike team must have shot her and left her to die. On screen, a security feed crackled, a robotic voice. "Tower fire under control. No sign of the package. Dog presumed alive." Brooks coughed, her voice like gravel. "They're after the glove. Drone picked up nitrile traces. Sheriff wants it destroyed." Ava knelt beside her, pressing gauze against the wound. "Who's calling the shots?" Brooks's breath rattled. "Ward Briggs, PAX Corps. I was supposed to scare you. Not this." She slumped. Gone. Ava closed her eyes. Mark rifled her pockets. Keycards, a folded map, Breakneck Ridge circled in red. "I'm ending this," he muttered, "but we need a way out." Ava nodded. Brooks used the service tunnel to smuggle in contraband. It bypasses the gates. If SWAT came through there, it might still be open. They moved fast, down a back stairwell and into a maintenance shaft that reeked of bleach and fuel. Sirens faded behind them. At the tunnel exit, a PAX Corps operative sat watching monitors. Ava crept behind him. Shh! Surgical scissors plunged into his neck. He hit the floor without a sound. Mark and Ava ran into the rain-soaked dawn. Freedom was still miles away, but the truth was coming with them. Rain slicked the pavement as the pair burst into the open. The visitor lot buzzed back to life, lights flickering as power returned across the penitentiary. One van idled alone, keys dangling in the ignition. No one in sight. Mark yanked the door open and jumped into the driver's seat, flexing raw wrists on the wheel. Ava buckled in beside him, gripping the USB like a lifeline. "Tower or hospital?" she asked. Mark's eyes were stone. "Tower." He jammed the gear shift and peeled out. Tires shrieked. Guards barely had time to turn their heads as the prison van tore through the outer gate and vanished into the dawn. 6:04 a.m., 66 hours to execution. And half the county wanted them dead before the sun was high. Smoke smudged the horizon as they neared Breakneck Ridge. Controlled burns were still flickering in the pines, though nothing about it felt controlled. Deputies blocked public roads. Fire engines hummed. PAX Corps vehicles mixed in, indistinguishable from state officials, unless you knew what to look for. Mark parked the van a half-mile south of the site, tucking it behind the overgrown ruins of a collapsed mill. Kudzu cloaked the wreckage like ivy on a tomb. They geared up, Mark in a stolen deputy's raincoat, Ava tucking the glove pouch into a battered tackle box to avoid suspicion. Radios crackled on their hips, tuned to county frequencies. They hiked, and when they crested the ridge, there it was. The fire watchtower, blackened but still upright against a smoke-gray sky. One leg scorched, cabin glass blown out. Beneath it, chaos. A pop-up command tent buzzed with activity. Firefighters, deputies, PAX Corps operatives, all working together, all pretending they weren't on opposite sides of the law. Henrietta sat on a tailgate, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Blood crusted on her temple. EMTs hovered. Ranger lay leashed to the bumper, alert, unharmed, unmuzzled. His eyes scanned the woods like he knew Mark was close. Mark's heart clenched. They were alive, but not safe. He raised binoculars, saw Reed, storming toward Henrietta, rage flaring beneath a forced smile. His gestures grew more aggressive with every word. Ava hissed beside him. They didn't find the glove. She must have hidden it before they got to her. She bought us time, Mark muttered. We still have the real one. Then he saw him. Ward Briggs. The Pax Corps COO stood nearby, dry in an expensive raincoat, whispering to Reed. Briggs glanced at the smoldering wreckage of the drone. Then at Ranger. Then he pulled out a lighter. Ava's hand gripped Mark's sleeve. They're about to erase the evidence, starting with the dog. Mark scanned the scene. One generator powering the command post. Fuel lines stretching to a portable tank. He clicked the deputy radio. Unit 12 to command. Hotspot flaring on south flank. Requesting water tender. Static. Then, affirmative. Copy, Unit 12. No challenge code. Perfect. Within minutes, a fire crew peeled off to handle the non-existent blaze. Deputies followed to assist. The perimeter thinned. Mark and Ava slipped through the underbrush. When they reached the fuel tank, Mark stuffed a rag into the vent. Ava struck her lighter. Foom. The flames caught fast, orange licking across the damp steel. Men shouted. Briggs spun. Chaos bloomed. Henrietta saw Mark's silhouette in the smoke. Before she could cry out, Ranger's ears snapped up. He lunged, leash taut. Mark sprinted. Ava darted to the truck. Hen thrust her the duffel bag. They missed it, Hen wheezed. I stashed another glove. Mark sliced the leash. Ranger launched himself into Mark's chest, tail wagging, eyes bright. They had what they needed. Now, all they had to do was survive it. Ava jammed the second glove pouch beside the first. 2 gloves now, either one capable of breaking the case wide open. But which one mattered more? They had no time to find out. At the sound of footsteps, Mark spun. Sheriff Reed stood frozen, disbelief etched across his face. Daniels, he croaked. You're supposed to be? He reached for his sidearm. Mark raised both hands. The evidence is with the feds. You shoot me, it goes live. It was a bluff. The USB was still in his pocket. Reed didn't care. Beside him, Ward Briggs sneered. There is no exoneration, he snapped, drawing a compact pistol. Only loose ends. He fired. Ranger exploded into motion. At Mark's shout, "Guard!" the shepherd slammed into Briggs's arm. The gun went wide, bullet striking the side of a fuel barrel. Whoom! Fire surged. Canvas tarps ignited. Screams erupted. Troopers dove for hoses. Briggs stumbled, bleeding. Ranger whirled, driving him back. Mark tackled Reed, slamming them both into the mud. Fists flew. Reed clawed for his weapon. Mark headbutted him, then yanked the cuffs from the sheriff's belt and clamped them onto Reed's own wrists. Ava raced through smoke and fire toward Reed's Tahoe. Inside, exactly what she hoped for. A secure comms terminal pre-configured for crisis uploads. She plugged in the USB. Chain of custody logs, drone footage, the body cam testimony from Brooks, all of it. Auto-uploading to the State Attorney General's tip line. The one set up after the last Pax Corps scandal. Back at the tent, Ranger kept the gunmen at bay, darting, growling, herding them away from Ava. Briggs staggered upright, clutching a road flare. With a snarl, he jammed it into the diesel runoff at the tower's base. "Burn it all!" he screamed. Mark dove, but the flare hissed. Too late. Fire raced up the legs of the tower. Ava watched the upload bar tick. 96%. 98%. 100%. "Got it!" she yelled, yanking the drive free. Henrietta clambered into the Tahoe. "If y'all want to live, get in." Mark threw Reed into the back seat, slammed the door, and leapt behind the wheel. Ranger launched in after him. Ava swung in, duffel clutched tight. The tower groaned, flames spiraling. Then it collapsed, crashing through smoke like a falling monument. Gas tanks exploded. Briggs vanished into the underbrush. State fire crews roared onto the scene. Choppers circled. And for the first time in years, Sheriff Reed sat cuffed in the back of a speeding vehicle, nose inches from a snarling shepherd. Mark glanced at the clock. 9:11 a.m., 61 hours left on his death sentence. But the truth was finally out there. Now they just had to survive what came next. The city shimmered ahead, like a mirage in the rising heat. Atlanta. 6 lanes wide. Tower cranes like iron fingers. And at 80 miles an hour, Mark Daniels kept the stolen Tahoe steady in the fast lane, lights flicking low enough to part traffic without causing panic. In the back seat, Sheriff Reed shifted uncomfortably in his cuffs. A purpling bruise swelled beneath one eye, the legacy of the tower brawl. Every time the SUV hit a pothole, he winced and glared at Ranger. The shepherd didn't break eye contact. He simply curled his lip just enough to flash fang. Message received. Ava sat beside Mark, glued to her phone, eyes skimming rapidly through a hurricane of headlines. PAX Corps officials had already gone on record calling Breakneck Ridge a tragic miscommunication. Their PR engine was shifting blame, painting Reed as a rogue agent acting alone. Ava typed furiously, linking drone footage, crime scene photos, and Brooks's final confession. Every tweet was a shot across the bow. Henrietta, wedged in the back beside Reed, nodded off between adrenaline crashes. At one point, her shotgun slipped and clattered against the console, snapping her awake. She blinked, took in the skyline, and murmured, still breathing. That's something. They crossed the Chattahoochee at noon sharp. On talk radio, a DJ joked about betting pools. Will Georgia really execute a man whose dog just saved half a SWAT team? The room laughed, then shifted, somber. If they do, what's left of justice? GBI headquarters rose from the street like a slab of tinted glass, wedged between weather-worn brick. Sleek, sterile. Armed agents waited in a circle as Mark eased the Tahoe to a stop. Reed was taken into custody without fanfare. Ava and Henrietta were ushered inside. Mark followed, Ranger pressed to his thigh, both blinking under harsh fluorescent lights. Processing took 2 hours. Mark gave fingerprints, surrendered both glove pouches, watched forensic teams photograph the resin smears like ancient fossils. He sat for a 20-page sworn statement. Ava signed 6 affidavits. Henrietta sipped burnt coffee and corrected everyone's timeline with a dispatcher's exactitude. Meanwhile, Reed, now dressed in orange, demanded a lawyer and raved about being kidnapped. No one listened. Eventually, Assistant Attorney General Leslie Vaughn appeared. Cool, precise. Her blazer folded neatly over one arm. She spoke like a stopwatch. The judge will issue a ruling by 8, she said. A stay or a go. But there were complications. PAX Corps' lobbyists were already moving, pressuring state committees to strip authority from Vaughn's office. If that happened, all the power shifted to the Public Safety Commission, where Reed had allies. If anything went wrong, even a misstep in how the evidence was handled, it could all collapse. Vaughn's tone never changed, but Ava noticed her tapping her pen. Mark said nothing, just waited and held tight to the only truth that mattered. The story wasn't over. Not yet. PAX Corps' legal machine moved fast. Within hours, their lobbyists were working back channels, leaning on committee chairs, drafting emergency motions, and whispering into the ears of public safety commissioners. If they succeeded, control over Mark's case would be yanked from the Attorney General and handed to a more pliable board. Mark didn't need to hear the details. He could feel it. The same old pressure, different cell. Meanwhile, evidence handlers double-checked every chain of custody form. Not a single signature could be out of order. Not one timestamp smudged. Any gap could sink their case in seconds. Mark nodded silently through it all, as if they were discussing lumber contracts. But inside, his heart thundered like a war drum. For now, he and Ranger were held in a quiet dorm, reserved for high-profile protective custody. The cot was clean. The cuffs were padded. An agent even left bacon from an Egg McMuffin on the floor. Ranger's tail thumped twice in approval. It almost felt normal, until the televisions in the room flashed breaking news. Ward Briggs resigns from Pax Corps, claims medical leave, vows cooperation. Mark stared at the screen. He knew what it meant. The resignation was just a smoke signal. Briggs was getting ready to disappear. At 6:30, agents wheeled the cooler with both glove pouches into a triple-armored transport. 3 identical white vans, riflemen at every door. Vaughn, Ava, and Henrietta rode in the middle. Mark and Ranger took the lead van, escorted by 2 armed agents and a trauma kit that smelled like bleach and fear. The highway southbound grew denser with each mile. Commuters, news vans, curious onlookers lining bridges, waving banners, "Free the Handler." Just past the Freedom Parkway split, the convoy began to slow. Up ahead, a sanitation truck, parked sideways across 2 lanes. Its brake lights glowed like eyes in the dusk. Too late, the drivers realized. Ambush. The truck jackknifed, sealing the convoy against the concrete barrier. Mark braced. A black panel van rammed into the side of the middle transport. A deafening crash. Airbags detonated. Magnesium flashbangs painted the intersection white. Through the comm radio, Ava's scream. 2 masked men emerged, short-barrel rifles in hand. One went straight for the rear cargo door, snapping padlocks with bolt cutters. The other swept fire across the gridlocked cars, keeping bystanders pinned behind windshields. Mark's driver cursed. No onboard weapons. They were the decoy. Before anyone could stop him, Ranger shattered the van's side door with both front paws. He launched into the chaos. His jaws clamped down on the cooler as the attackers dragged it free. The gunman kicked him, once, twice, but Ranger didn't let go. The handle snapped clean off in his teeth, and so did the attacker's balance. He hit the asphalt hard. Mark dove out behind him, wrists still half shackled, but mobile enough to tackle the second assailant as he grabbed Ava near a waiting motorcycle. They crashed under the bike, fuel hissing into the gutter. Then, boom! A shot rang out. Henrietta, across the intersection, had fired her revolver. A clean hit, thigh shot. The man collapsed, screaming. The second gunman reached for a pistol in his boot, but he stopped cold. Ranger stood over him, muzzle to throat, eyes burning, and this time, nobody moved. Sirens converged like a closing net. Atlanta PD cruisers screeched in from all sides, blue lights slicing through the wreckage and smoke. A news chopper circled above, camera trained on the street capturing the moment. Ranger, bloody-jawed and unflinching, standing over 2 disarmed attackers like a living statue. It looked like something out of legend. Within 20 minutes, the scene was secured. The glove pouches were logged again, agents carefully sweeping spent casings from the pavement, like precious artifacts. First responders herded civilians away. Henrietta stood near the cordon, unfazed, revolver still in hand. By 7:45, the convoy limped into the basement of the courthouse, private access only. The elevator smelled like gunpowder and melting rubber. Everyone looked shaken. No one said a word. Upstairs, Judge Isabella Benson arrived in chambers wearing black jeans under her robe and a ponytail still wet from a power shower. She reviewed Vaughn's brief. The gloves, The timestamps, the footage, the last words of a dying detective. She was clearly leaning toward a stay. Until the door opened again. Marjorie Kleine strode in, slick as cable news, hair perfect, expression smug. She unrolled a folder like it was a royal decree. The Ridley Report. Inside, security logs from a state server showing that Ava Patel's admin credentials had been used to access the laundromat DVR weeks earlier, long enough to alter video frames. The implication: Ava doctored evidence. Ava's mouth fell open. That's impossible. I never... Judge Benson asked 3 questions. Procedural, precise. Vaughn answered, but couldn't disprove the log. The judge sighed, regret thick in her voice. I have no choice. The stay is delayed pending ethics review. Mr. Daniels will return to holding. The gavel fell like a tombstone. Mark barely registered the sound as guards cuffed him again and led him away. Ranger followed without a command, ears low, tail still. The walk back to protective custody felt longer than any hike through the Georgia woods. Back in the dorm, the silence gnawed. Outside the barred window, the sky swirled with purple clouds that hid the moon. Mark dropped onto the cot, one arm flung over his eyes. Ranger sat at the end of the bed, eyes fixed on him, chest rising and falling in slow, anxious rhythm. Mark reached over and stroked the dog's neck, whispering in Pashto, the code they used overseas, words that meant, go quiet, find it, come home. He slipped the backup USB and a glove pouch into Ranger's vest. Then he removed the vent cover at the base of the wall. The shepherd looked at him, then slipped inside the ductwork. Gone. No nails, no sound, just the distant hum of fans. 54 hours remained. Somewhere across the courthouse, Ava sat in a holding room, staring out a one-way mirror, her face blank, her fingers motionless. Captain Flowers stood near the door, silent, and in that silence, the system held its breath. Ava tried to focus as Marjorie Kleine circled her like a shark in heels. The Pax Corps attorney's voice was smooth, rehearsed, calibrated to sow doubt. Access logs don't lie, she said. The only question is whether the tampering was personal or political. Ava's head throbbed. The whole situation reeked of setup, and she knew it. But proving it? That would take a miracle. Then came the scratch. Captain Flowers opened the door, scanning the hallway. Nothing. A beat later, another scratch, softer, lower. He looked down. There, standing calmly in the corridor dusted with air vent grime, was Ranger. Muzzle flecked with cobwebs, vest slightly torn, and in his mouth, a sealed evidence pouch. Flowers blinked. Kleine stopped talking mid-sentence. Ava was already out of her seat. Ranger padded forward, tail neutral, eyes locked on Ava's. He set the pouch gently on the steel table. Flowers picked it up, unzipped it, and pulled out the original USB drive, the one Mark had smuggled out of the prison ductwork. Ava connected it to the bureau's offline laptop. Her fingers trembled. The hash check started. Everyone leaned in. Every byte matched, time-stamped before the alleged DVR tampering. The entire Ridley report was built on a forged log. Flowers exhaled sharply. This is the original, he said. No edits. No corruption. He printed the verification sheet, signed the chain of custody form himself, and snapped a photo of the final hash screen. Kleine tried to recover, spinning excuses, raising objections, but Flowers had already picked up the phone. Get Judge Benson, now. An hour later, at 2 a.m., the judge appeared via emergency video call. Her robe barely covered a university t-shirt. She read the verification, cross-checked the hash log, looked down at Ranger, now curled beneath the defense table like a furry sphinx, and she signed a 48-hour stay of execution. Just like that, death was paused. Until Sunday morning, Ava sat back, throat tight, tears held in place by exhaustion alone. Ranger nudged her elbow with his nose. She whispered, "You did it." But she wasn't the one in danger anymore. Mark was still in lockdown, still alone. By 4 a.m., she found him asleep on the cot, one arm slung over his eyes. Ranger barreled onto the bed, tongue lolling, licking Mark's face until he bolted upright in confusion. Ava leaned close and whispered, "You're safe. For now." Mark smiled, then frowned, because they both knew this wasn't over. Briggs was still out there, shredding files, paying off senators, buying time. Henrietta appeared in the doorway, shotgun slung like a purse. She'd heard everything. "The clock won't wait," she said, "but I still got fire in me." Mark swung his legs off the cot. "We take Briggs," he said, voice flat, "before daylight." No one objected. Downstairs they found a bureau maintenance truck, keys dangling from the visor. Mark changed into a janitor's jumpsuit. It barely fit. Ava cloned a master access badge. Henrietta grabbed the radio. Briggs's location: Pax Corps HQ, Cobb County. Night shift. Just enough guards to make it risky, not enough to make it impossible. They rolled out of Atlanta at 3:30 a.m., tires hissing through puddles that reflected fading stars. The storm had passed, but its fingerprints were everywhere. Broken branches, glinting glass, the stale smell of smoke trailing behind them like memory. Mark sat in the passenger seat of the bureau's maintenance truck, tugging at the sleeves of a stolen janitor's jumpsuit. It pulled tight across the shoulders, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the badge clone Ava had laminated, now clipped to his chest, and the hole he'd sliced into Ranger's vest, just big enough to hide a second encrypted thumb drive. Beside him, Ava tapped notes into her phone. Henrietta drove, shotgun resting under her feet, like it had every day since 1984. Ahead, Pax Corps Regional HQ loomed, 20 stories of mirrored glass, gleaming even in darkness, clean-cut lawn, reflecting pool, a monument to private power in the middle of suburbia. At the front desk, 2 sleepy contractors in security uniforms played poker on a cracked phone screen. No one looked up when the truck rumbled down the loading ramp and eased into the bay. They didn't notice Ranger slip out through the shadows. They didn't see him vanish through a cracked service door. The building sighed and blinked like any other skyscraper, but its heartbeat was paper. Shredder bags stacked knee-high in the upper offices, each one pulped with secrets. Mark rode the elevator to the 13th floor, flickering fluorescents buzzing overhead. He hummed to himself to slow his nerves. The doors opened on an empty hallway. He ducked into an IT closet, plugged the cloned badge into a maintenance port, and ran Ava's script. The download bar began. Slow. Agonizingly slow. In the air ducked above, Ranger gave 2 soft scrapes. Clear. 2 floors up, Ward Briggs paced alone in his corner suite, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat darkening his dress shirt. He barked into his phone, fingers hammered at his keyboard. His empire was falling apart. That's when Ranger's growl rolled through the doorway. Low, final. Briggs turned. Mark stepped in behind the dog, body cam blinking red. He spoke calmly, each word like a hammer strike. Murder. Conspiracy. Attempted assassination. You're finished. Briggs blinked, calculating. He tried to smirk, then charm, then stall. When none of it landed, he tried fury. Still nothing worked. Finally, the truth spilled out. Not in one speech, but in fragments. Names, numbers, account IDs, the truth about the drone, the glove, the ghost payments wired from Cayman banks, the bribery, the blackmail, the plan. Glass shattered, a whisper of sound. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Mark saw it, a red halo blooming on Briggs's back. Sniper shot. Ward Briggs collapsed, mouth half open in shock, Mark dove behind the desk. Ranger hurled himself across the office, knocking Mark clear of a second shot. Across a nearby rooftop, the shooter pivoted. And from a maintenance doorway, Henrietta raised her Remington. The old shotgun bucked against her shoulder. The sniper crumpled, disappearing over the edge. Inside, Mark dragged Briggs behind the desk. His breathing was already ragged. But with one last breath, he leaned close and whispered a passphrase. Mark repeated it aloud, into the camera. Then the PaxCorp kingpin went still, 6:09 a.m. The sun hadn't risen, but the truth had. Mark, Ava, and Henrietta stood in the server room of PaxCorp's headquarters, surrounded by blinking consoles and humming hard drives. Ranger sat by the doorway, ears alert, blood still flecking the fur around his collar. Ava typed like lightning, inserting the passphrase Briggs had gasped with his final breath. The moment she hit enter, a vault of encrypted files burst open: surveillance archives, financial trails, black site blueprints, contractor invoices marked classified, foreign. "This is it," she whispered. All the evidence PaxCorp had buried, now in their hands. Mark plugged in the live stream unit from the body cam. "Go wide. Feed to every public channel, alternative network, and military whistleblower site. If we die today, it won't die with us." Ava nodded. "Ready?" Henrietta reached into her pocket and flicked open her ancient brick-thick flip phone. "You know," she said, "I've had this emergency alert contact saved for 10 years. Never thought I'd use it." She pressed send. Across Georgia, phones buzzed, televisions flipped, screens at gas stations, bank lobbies, schools, and sheriff's offices blinked once, and then began streaming body cam footage, drone angles, confession transcripts. PaxCorp's lies unraveled in real time, and as that truth raced through the network, public outrage detonated. Within 15 minutes, the Attorney General issued a full order. Immediate stay of execution for Mark Daniels. Initiate federal probe of PaxCorp operations and local law enforcement ties. Protective custody activated for all whistleblowers and primary witnesses. Mark stared at the screen. It was over. Not the aftermath, not the trials, but the running, the hiding. The death clock that had ticked for months had stopped. Ranger barked once, sharp, satisfied, then collapsed at Mark's feet, exhausted. By 8 a.m., media trucks surrounded PaxCorp HQ like vultures. Helicopters circled, protesters gathered. Some cried, some cheered, all held signs. "Free the handler. Believe the dog. Justice doesn't need a badge, just a bark." Inside, agents swarmed, evidence bagged, floors cleared. Ava sat on the edge of a desk, legs swinging like a kid who hadn't slept in 3 days. Henrietta leaned against the doorframe, fingers still wrapped around her shotgun. "Think they'll name a highway after us?" Mark chuckled. "Doubt it. Maybe a leash brand." Then he looked down at Ranger, now curled in his lap. The dog opened one eye, blinked, and nudged Mark's chest with his nose. Mark smiled. "You saved me again, old man." Ranger huffed softly, then licked the blood off Mark's hand like it was nothing at all. 3 weeks later. The courtroom was packed, not with chains or guards or death warrants, but with press badges, federal observers, and families who had once believed the headlines. Mark Daniels stood beside his lawyer in a tailored suit, not a jumpsuit. His wrists were free. His posture was straighter than it had been in years, and at his side, lying calmly at attention, was Ranger, his vest freshly cleaned, the service animal tag gleaming under the lights. The judge's voice echoed, solemn but sure. "Given the overwhelming evidence presented, this court vacates all charges against Mr. Mark Daniels, effective immediately. Furthermore, the state of Georgia acknowledges a miscarriage of justice and will move to dismiss all remaining indictments." Murmurs surged. Some gasped, others clapped. One woman sobbed into her hands. Mark didn't smile. Not yet. He only looked down at Ranger and said quietly, "It's over." And this time, it truly was. Outside, sunlight bathed the courthouse steps in gold. Henrietta waited with a bouquet of sorry-looking daisies she said were from the station vending machine. Ava wore jeans and a press badge she refused to use. She had declined 5 TV interviews already that morning, telling them, "He doesn't need a story. He is the story." As they descended the stairs, Ranger paused. He looked out over the crowd, then up at the sky, where a helicopter circled like a slow guardian. And then he barked. Not once, but twice. Not a warning, a signal, a celebration. Later that evening, in the quiet hills outside Dahlonega, Mark stood in the yard of a house no one had lived in for years. It was small, wooden, faded, but it was his. Ranger lay in the grass nearby, chewing what remained of a retirement bone Henrietta had claimed was older than the internet. Inside, the walls were still bare, the fridge still humming empty, but there was a warmth already settling in, like history had paused, just for a breath. Ava sat on the porch rail, sipping sweet tea. "You could sue them, you know," she said softly. "Win millions." Mark shook his head. "I don't want a payday." She tilted her head. "Then what do you want?" He glanced down at Ranger, who looked up, then thumped his tail once. Mark said, "A leash in my hand. A sky without sirens, and maybe a life that doesn't start with surviving." Ava nodded, and for a while, they just sat there, letting silence say everything else. The war was over. The world had watched, and the handler had finally come home. 4 days Le Pax Corps' corporate headquarters sat silent beneath the morning sun, a fortress of glass with its windows blacked out by court order. No employees came. No phones rang. Mark stood on the Capitol steps in a borrowed tie and pressed shirt. The collar still itched. Camera was hers. "This isn't about heroics," she said calmly. "It's about a system behind her." Mark gave Ranger a scratch behind the ear. The shepherd sat like royalty, stoic, inside the Capitol. A special congressional session had convened. Senator Boyette, once a Pax Corps ally, now led the charge to dismantle the corporation's federal contracts. The drone footage, the coerced silence, the black site operations, all of it was part of the public record now. And in the shadows of those hearings, Reed flipped. Sheriff Dale Reed, still bruised from his arrest and desperate to save himself, began spilling names. Contractors, judges, deputies on private payrolls. His plea deal was signed with trembling hands. Even Kleine, Pax Corps' top lawyer, had gone silent. Her last press release replaced by a subpoena. Henrietta watched all this from the courthouse steps, sunglasses hiding the fact that she hadn't slept since the raid. "You know," she muttered to Mark, "if we'd tried this a year ago, they'd have buried us in paperwork." Mark shrugged. They still might. At that moment, a little boy broke through the crowd. 8, maybe 9. Thin, dark eyes wide. He ran straight to Ranger and hugged his neck without fear. Mark tensed, but Ranger simply leaned into the embrace, eyes soft. "My dad says you're the dog that saved the world," the boy whispered. Mark knelt beside him. "No," he said. "He just saved me. The world's your job." The boy nodded solemnly and ran back into the crowd. Ava stepped off the podium. "You're becoming a symbol," she told Mark. "You and that dog." Mark glanced at Ranger. "We didn't ask for that. Symbols never do." He exhaled, then checked his watch. "I have somewhere to be." At the north edge of the city stood Cypress Run Correctional, the same facility where, just weeks ago, Mark had stood one heartbeat away from lethal injection. Now he walked in through the front door with a visitor's pass, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, Ranger, Avenue, and 3 Justice Department attorneys. They weren't here for revenge. They were here to start opening doors, to find the others Pax Corps had buried, to bring light into cells where truth had never been allowed. One case at a time. Cypress Run. Correctional was quieter than Mark remembered. Not calmer, just quieter. Like a place holding its breath. The echo of Ranger's claws on the linoleum seemed to ripple through the corridors, louder than the footsteps of the humans who followed. Guards nodded stiffly, unsure whether to salute or scowl. Some remembered Mark as a condemned man. Others had watched the broadcast, had seen the truth. No one stopped them. Warden Keller met them outside the inner wing. "This way," she said, flipping through a printed docket. "You've requested reviews of 17 cases. We've flagged 9 as high priority. Similar patterns. Shared contractors. Falsified forensics." Mark scanned the names. A couple rang bells. Men he'd seen in the yard, heads down, eyes hollowed by years. He held the list tightly. Ava stood beside him, already syncing timestamps and prosecutor rosters. Behind them, Ranger waited quietly. In the first cell door opened. A man stepped into the light, gray in his beard. Track marks long healed. He looked at Mark like he was a ghost. "You're Daniels," he said softly. Mark nodded. The man didn't ask for proof. He simply asked, "Is it true?" Ava stepped forward. "We have records showing your key witness was paid off by a Pax Corps affiliate. We'll need you to verify a few things. Then we push for vacatur." The man blinked hard, then nodded. "Okay." Cell by cell they moved, each one a time capsule. Some held fury, others only silence. One held a former medic who had stitched up Ranger's leg years ago. In a war they both barely survived. He saluted the dog. Ranger stared, then gently licked the man's outstretched hand. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, but none of them noticed. Justice wasn't loud now. It was methodical. Paper trails, testimonies, dots connecting in real time. A web Pax Corps thought would never unravel. In the visitation office, Henrietta sat with a battered laptop and a burner phone. She ran background checks while feeding Ranger bites of jerky. "There's at least 3 dozen more," she muttered, "hidden under sealed settlements, shell companies, buried plea deals." Mark leaned on the doorframe. "This could take years." Henrietta didn't look up. "Then we'd better start now." He nodded. And for the first time in a long time, the word future didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a choice. 2 weeks later, the team set up a temporary operations hub inside an abandoned community center on the outskirts of Macon. The air still smelled like old chalk and mopped tile, but the place had power, privacy, and space to think. Ranger claimed a corner lined with foam mats in Henrietta's coat. He'd taken to sleeping with one eye open, never quite at ease in the stillness. Neither was Mark. Ava pinned a new string map to the wall, connecting mugshots, company names, and sealed indictments. Lines crisscrossed like spiderwebs, the same handful of shell firms cropping up again and again. At the center of it all was Ridgeline Securities, a defunct Pax Corps subsidiary that had funneled independent contractors into both law enforcement and prison staffing. Former mercenaries, disgraced officers, men who took orders, not oaths. Mark stared at a blurry ID badge for one such man, Harold Finn. He recognized the eyes, cold, gray, focused. "I saw him," Mark muttered, in breakneck. He was the one barking into the headset, giving orders during the ambush. Ava raised an eyebrow. "He's not just a middleman. He might be command." Henrietta slapped a file on the table. Well, guess what? Finn's not in hiding. He's on retainer, active license, currently employed through a federal security grant. That's your tax dollars feeding a ghost. Mark's hands clenched. We find him. Tracking Finn wasn't simple. He moved like a trained operative. Frequent location changes, burner numbers, no credit card trail. But they had an edge. Ranger's memory. Mark held up a photo to the dog, who sniffed it once, then barked. Later, as the team scoured aerial images and traffic cams, Ranger barked again, louder. "Pause that feed," Ava said. On the screen, a blurry shot of a man stepping out of a black SUV near a private airstrip in northern Florida. Same building, same gate, same limp. It's him. Henrietta was already on the phone with a contact at the Marshal Service. By morning, they had a location, a rented safe house outside Tallahassee. Brick siding, high fence, no kids. Mark checked the map, then checked Ranger's vest. Ava noticed the look in his eyes. "You're going in." Mark nodded. "This isn't justice through courts anymore. This is truth extraction." Ava didn't argue. Henrietta loaded the shotgun. The sun was setting when the truck pulled away from the community center. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, eyes fixed ahead. There was no ceremony, just mission and memory. The safe house sat beneath a canopy of moss-draped oaks, surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence, and silence that felt intentional. Mark parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, Ranger at his side. The dog moved like liquid shadow, ears pivoting, nose twitching at every shift in the wind. Mark's vest was light, no rifle, just a body cam, a hidden mic, and his old sidearm, discreet and loaded. Henrietta's voice crackled in his earpiece. No movement inside, lights on in the back. Feels like he's expecting no one, or someone he trusts. Mark didn't answer. He hopped the back fence, crouched near a broken lattice panel, and peered through the slats of the kitchen blinds. A figure inside, alone, pacing. Mark recognized the limp, the bulk under the jacket, the nervous flick of the hand toward the waistband. It was Finn. Mark tapped twice on the glass. Finn spun, reaching, too slow. Ranger crashed through the door with a force that shattered the frame. Mark followed, weapon raised. "Don't." Finn froze, hands up. But the smirk remained. "Didn't think they'd send a dead man." Mark kicked the gun across the floor. "We're both ghosts. Let's talk like it." The interrogation started cold. Mark laid out the photos, the flight records, the connections to Breakneck. Finn laughed at the first few, called them conspiracy stuff. But when Ranger snarled and Mark produced the witness transcripts, the tone shifted. Finn talked, not out of guilt, but ego. He bragged about private contracts with PaxCorp, the kill order issued on the drone operator, the botched hit in Cobb County, the snipers pulled from a privatized recon pool in Montana. And then he slipped. Mentioned the Reynolds Protocol. Mark leaned in. "What's that?" Finn's lips tightened. "Doesn't matter now. It's above you. Above everyone." That's when the window shattered. A flashbang clanged against the fridge and detonated. Mark hit the floor. Finn dove behind the counter. The front door burst open. 2 masked men, full tactical gear, silencers already raised. Private kill team. Ranger launched first, straight into the first man's chest. The second raised his gun. Henrietta's shotgun barked from outside. The second man dropped. Mark rolled to his feet, dragging Finn up by the collar. Outside, Ava pulled up in the van, tires squealing. Ranger leapt through the open side door mid-run. Mark shoved Finn in after him and climbed in last. Bullets chased them into the night, but the tires held. Inside the van, Finn coughed blood. "You idiots," he gasped. "They don't care if I talk. I'm a loose thread. You've just made yourselves targets again." Mark leaned close. We were always targets. Then he slammed the door shut behind them. The warehouse safehouse in Macon was dead quiet as the van rolled in. Henrietta threw the lock and swept the corners. Ava set up the encrypted uplink. Ranger paced, body still wired from the fight. And in the middle of it all, Harold Finn sat zip-tied to a steel chair, breathing heavy, bleeding lightly, and smiling like a man who thought he was still winning. Mark stood across from him, holding a hard drive. "Talk," he said flatly. "Everything on the Reynolds Protocol. Where it starts, where it ends." Finn chuckled, winced. "You think I'm the top of the pyramid? I'm a button. I get pushed." Ava brought over the files she'd recovered from Finn's laptop. Encrypted documents marked with federal contractor codes, ops reports with redacted names, and a buried email thread with subject lines like Override 29, Inmate Assets Viability. "This isn't about bounty hits," she said. "This is population control. You're monetizing lives, targeting inmates for black budget training, field ops, live tests." Mark stared at the screen. One file was labeled Dog Handler Gateway, Phase C expired. It had his name on it. Finn sneered. "Yeah, you were the test run. See how long a trained veteran lasts in the box with a loyal mutt and nothing to lose. You did well, almost too well, got noticed, and now they're burning it all down." Mark didn't move. Ava turned toward him. "This isn't just corruption. It's human experimentation, legalized entrapment, psychological warfare." Henrietta checked the camera feed. "And the same black SUV from Florida? Just past mile marker 92. 4 men, 2 sat phones. They're coming." Mark looked at Ranger, then at Finn. "You're going to live just long enough," he said, "to confess." 2 hours later, they walked into a federal courthouse in Atlanta with body cam footage, signed confession pages, and a bleeding contractor in cuffs. The building had already been briefed, thanks to Henrietta's contacts in internal affairs. The marshal at the door nodded grimly and waved them through. Upstairs, the Attorney General's Special Task Group waited. They weren't smiling, because they knew what this meant. If the Reynolds Protocol was real, it would detonate everything. Contracts, convictions, even elections. Mark laid the drive on the table. "This has everything. If you bury it, I will burn your house down in the court of public opinion." Ava folded her arms. Henrietta just loaded her shotgun in silence. No one laughed. The task force agents glanced at each other. Then began the process of evidence intake. Chain of custody, witness protection assignment, a request for full debrief in the morning. Mark nodded, but inside, he knew. This was just the second act, because somewhere out there, someone signed those orders, and they hadn't shown their face. Yet, by morning, the federal building was swarming. Task force analysts pored over the encrypted files Mark had delivered. A special Justice Department forensics team set up a war room on the 5th floor. The phrase Reynolds Protocol now sat bold-faced on an interagency bulletin, red-flagged and urgent. And yet, the deeper they dug, the fewer names they found. Whoever designed the protocol had used ghost authorizations, fake login chains, VPN scramblers, even forged credentials that looked real under audit. "They knew they'd be exposed eventually," Ava muttered, scanning line after line of digital fingerprints. "This was always meant to be deniable." Mark leaned over her shoulder. "But we're in the system now. We leave enough of a trail. Someone's going to panic." Henrietta stepped in from the hallway, tossing a manila folder onto the desk. "Someone already has." Inside, a leaked memo from a Pax Corps international partner, routed through Geneva. It referenced adjusting schedules due to U.S. legal exposure and, more importantly, named a liaison ID, RLD F-02. They cross-checked the ID. It tied back to a Federal Oversight Board member, Deputy Secretary Roland Dean. Mark stared at the name. He signed the funding approval for my drone team. He was at the ceremony. Shook my hand. Henrietta's eyes narrowed. Looks like we've got our first signature. By noon, the AG's task force was in motion. Subpoenas were drafted, flights grounded. A quiet lockdown was issued for Dean's office under the pretext of a classified briefing. But it was already too late. Dean was gone. Private jet. Filed destination Boston. Actual path. Vanished off radar near Newfoundland. He'd ghosted. "They're running," Ava said. "That means we hit something real." Mark looked down at Ranger, who was watching the door like a sentry. They always run when the dog gets too close. Meanwhile, across the country, small stories began appearing in regional news. Wrongful convictions linked to PaxCorp contractors. Security grants tied to Ridgeline training centers. Anonymous witnesses describing test sites in Nevada. Most people scrolled past them, but some didn't. An ex-military journalist picked it up. Then a retired judge. Then a senator running a cold re-election campaign suddenly decided to champion criminal justice reform. The web was tightening. But Mark knew better than to celebrate. "These guys built a system that outlived 3 administrations," he said. "They won't just go down." Henrietta chambered around. "Then we won't just knock. We'll tear the door off the hinges." Ava glanced at her laptop, a fresh ping lighting the screen. "Then get ready, because the next file just unlocked." Mark leaned in. What he saw made his jaw clench. Project Resurrect, list, former handlers. And at the top, Subject A, Daniels Mark. Status, terminated. Reactivation denied. Finalization pending. They hadn't just used him. They still had plans for him. The screen glowed faintly in the darkened room, casting cold light across Mark's face. Ava read the header again, her voice flat. Project Resurrect, former handlers archive. Under it, a line of names, some grayed out, others blinking red, all tagged with statuses like compromised, neutralized, asset failed, or worse, pending recall. Mark's name sat at the top, next to a classification code he hadn't seen since Kandahar. D6B, Autonomous Retention Subject. Henrietta leaned in. "That's not a discharge code." "No," Mark whispered. "It's a fallback trigger. It means they didn't just cut me loose. They kept a lever, in case they ever needed me again." Ava's eyes flicked across the page. "And this?" She clicked on a subfolder labeled Resert Package. Inside, psych evaluations, tactical reports, biostats, and behavioral override protocols, timetables, medication schedules, handler bonding patterns, predictive aggression maps. Mark stumbled back. They built a profile of how to break me again. Even Ranger growled low, sensing his partner's shift. Henrietta pulled her sidearm and ejected the magazine. "This isn't about blackmail. This is about control. You were never supposed to survive long enough to testify, but if you did, they made sure you could be flipped back." Ava said nothing. Her hands moved fast, isolating the files, encrypting them again, prepping a full upload to an independent data drop. "They wanted to see if loyalty could be repurposed after trauma," she said at last. "If you'd respond to new orders if the inputs were right." Mark clenched his fists. "They used the bond with my dog." A new file opened, one tagged K9 compensatory variables. Inside, videos. Footage of Mark and Ranger in combat zones. Simulations of separation distress. Calculated durations for maximum psychological compliance. Mark slammed the laptop shut. "We're done reading." Henrietta nodded. "Then let's get someone to listen." That evening, they met with Congresswoman Raina West, the only oversight member who hadn't taken PAX Corps donations. She sat in her unmarked field office in boots and denim, flanked by 2 ex-FBI analysts and a U.S. Marshal who kept his hand near his badge the whole time. Mark laid down the drive. West skimmed the surface. Her face changed. "Jesus," she muttered. "They built a domestic psych warfare program, using veterans, dogs, prisons." Ava nodded. "And it's still funded." West stood. "I'll call the Oversight Committee. You call the press." She turned to Mark. "You're not a weapon. You're a witness, and we're going to treat you like one." Mark didn't answer. He just looked at Ranger. The dog stared back, calm, tired, loyal. They didn't speak, but they both knew. The fight wasn't over. The leash had just changed hands. The interview studio was cold, uncomfortably sterile, like a lab or a morgue. Mark sat beneath soft lights, facing a woman with clipped vowels and a producer in her ear. PBS Frontline, Ava had chosen. Not ratings-driven, just the facts. Or so they claimed. Ranger lay quietly at Mark's feet, tail occasionally thumping the floor. The producer gave the countdown. 3, 2, 1. The interviewer began. "Mark Daniels, former military K-9 handler, survivor of PAX Corps' covert correctional program. You've been called a traitor, a hero, and a liability. What are you?" Mark looked into the lens and spoke the truth. "I'm what happens when you turn loyalty into a weapon and expect it not to fight back." For the next 47 minutes, he told everything. The drone that was meant to silence him, the false conviction, the death cell, the escape, Ranger's injuries, the kill team, the handler protocol, Project Resurrect. He didn't name every name, yet, but he named the system. "They didn't want me gone. They wanted me broken, obedient. They tested how far they could push a soldier with a dog before that bond snapped. I'm here because mine didn't." By the next morning, the interview had been seen by over 11 million people. News outlets replayed segments on loop. Veterans groups called for investigations. Civilians wept. Some raged, some denied. A new hashtag trended, #, not just a mutt photos, of service dogs flooded social media. In response, the Department of Defense issued a non-denial statement. PAX Corps' remaining offices were egged, then firebombed. The White House press secretary paused mid-briefing when asked about psychological retention experiments. Cameras caught the tremble in her water glass. But the enemies Mark feared most said nothing. No retaliation, no message. That silence, Mark knew, was worse than threats. They were waiting, watching, letting the story soften before they cut it down. That night, Ranger growled at the window of their temporary safe house. Not loud, not angry, just alert. Mark went to check. No one was there, but nailed to the porch railing was a note, handwritten in clean, blocky ink. "You were never the only one. Phase D already begun." Henrietta read it. "What the hell is Phase D?" Ava checked the old files. Her screen flashed red. "Deployment," she said. "It means whatever they tested on you, they're doing it to others now. Active field use, on civilians, or foreign soil." Mark didn't flinch. He simply picked up Ranger's vest from the hook, then turned toward the door. "We find them. They hit the first town just after dawn. It was small, off-grid, southern border, mostly farmland and dust. But something was wrong. Too quiet. And the people who were outside, eyes down, doors bolted, even the sheriff's truck sat empty, engine cold. Mark, Ava, and Henrietta walked through the center square like strangers in enemy territory. Ranger moved ahead, ears high, nose twitching every few steps. "Feels like an evacuation," Henrietta muttered. "No," Mark said. "It feels like they were told to stay silent." Ava's laptop pinged. "Got a match. Civilian camera drone picked up 3 men in tactical gear entering a farmhouse last night. No badges, no insignias. They moved like handlers, or worse, like those trained by one." Mark exhaled. Test subjects. The farmhouse was empty, but not untouched. Broken furniture, burned files, a photo still smoldering in the sink. Mark picked it up with tongs. It was a picture of a man and his dog, a German shepherd, lean, alert, with strange scarring across its flank. Ava found a tagged collar buried in the ash. It read, "Maximus, Phase D-03. Henrietta swore. "They're using the same bond structure, different dog, different handler." Mark felt his stomach twist. Ranger sniffed the charred floorboards, then whined, a soft, keening noise he rarely made. He looked up at Mark. The message was clear. Whatever had been here, it suffered, and it was gone. For that evening, back at the mobile ops van, Ava cracked the next file fragment. It listed 12 Phase D deployments, all scattered across rural or conflict-heavy zones. Each site, a bonded pair, handler, and dog. All recruited under false pretenses, some from prisons, others from failed VA programs. One, shockingly, had been pulled from a juvenile facility. Age, 17. "They're not refining," Ava whispered. "They're expanding." Henrietta ran her fingers over her shotgun. "This isn't a program anymore. It's a playbook." Mark stared out the window. "You think I was the prototype. I wasn't." He turned to Ranger. "I was the proof of concept." Later that night, while the others slept, Mark wrote a letter. Not to the press, not to Congress. To a handler he once knew, Mira Schultz, presumed KIA in Kandahar, but now listed as Phase D-02. He had no idea if she was alive, but he knew the people who trained her were. He folded the letter, sealed it, and slid it into a courier envelope, addressed to a private box in Berlin. "Find her," he told the carrier. "She might be the only one who understands what's coming." Ranger watched as the door closed behind the messenger. His eyes didn't leave it for a full hour. The tip came anonymously. A voice-disguised call routed through a burner. Short, clipped, precise. "If you want Phase D answers, go to the grain silo outside Miller's Ridge. Midnight. Come alone." Henrietta hated it. Ava double-checked for traps, but Mark only nodded. "I'm going," he said. Ranger too. The silo loomed like a dead sentinel in the dark, its shadow stretching long under the moon. The cornfields around it rustled faintly in the wind, but the silence was heavy, almost loaded. Mark approached the broken gate. Ranger paused beside him, ears forward, breath slow. Then, from the shadows, a voice. "You're late." Mark turned. A woman stepped forward. Mira Schultz, gaunt, hardened, one eye scarred shut. Her posture was military but fractured, like someone fighting muscle memory. And at her side, a sleek, black Belgian Malinois, eyes sharp and unreadable. "You're alive," Mark said. "Barely," Mira answered. "They tried to erase me. Phase D wasn't a deployment. It was a purge test. See who breaks, who snaps, who survives it, and still listens." Mark stepped closer. "Why call me now?" Mira glanced at Ranger. "Because you didn't snap. You broke the algorithm, and that means you're dangerous. To them." She pulled out a flash drive. "This is everything I copied before they pulled me from the network. Handler profiles, activation codes, site locations. But there's one thing I couldn't trace." She hesitated. "They're building a new site, not just for testing, for scaling, indoctrination, Fast cycle obedience training. No bonds, just fear-based response. And they're calling it... She paused. Her mouth tightened. Unit Echo. Mark took the drive. Where? Somewhere in Nevada, under old Air Force property, Groom Lake region. But they've gone full blackout. Satellite jamming. No heat signatures. Henrietta's voice crackled in Mark's earpiece. She's telling the truth. We've seen signs in that corridor. Ghost convoys, zero traffic logs, hush contracts with regional power grids. Suddenly, Mira tensed. She looked behind her. The dog growled low. Then, whiz-pop, a suppressed round hit the silo wall an inch from Mark's head. Move! Mira dove left. Mark rolled right. Ranger launched into the dark. More shots. Silenced. Precise. A kill squad. Mira's dog engaged. Silent. Brutal. Mark caught a glimpse of a masked man lowering a scoped rifle from the tree line. Too late. Ranger was already on him. The forest lit up with muzzle flashes, then stopped. Silence again. Heavy breathing. Burnt grass. Blood on bark. Mira staggered back to her feet. Mark met her eyes. You coming with us? She nodded, but said nothing. The only sound left was the wind and the quiet click of Ava uploading the flash drive's contents into 3 mirrored servers. They weren't just exposing the system now. They were declaring war on it. 2 days after the ambush, they were deep in the desert. Nevada flatlands, where cell signals vanished and old secrets went to die. The flash drive Mira gave them had revealed partial coordinates to Site Echo, a fortified underground facility operating under the guise of a decommissioned radar station. No public records, no access roads, and no official agency willing to claim it. But Henrietta had pulled favors. She stood beside Mark now, inside a temporary ops van, parked behind a bluff, holding a printed satellite scan. There's a tunnel entrance here, shielded, likely armored. No guard towers, no exterior personnel. That means it's all inside. Automated security. Mark stared at the photo. And the dogs? Ava pulled up thermal stills. 12 heat signatures, each one paired with a human. Handlers and canines, likely in deep conditioning trials. Mira confirmed it. They call it echo looping, repetitive trauma bond simulations. Some of those dogs have been cycled through 3 handlers in 6 weeks. They don't form loyalty. They form dependency. It breaks them faster. Mark's jaw clenched. They're building weapons, not partners. Henrietta tossed him a headset. Then we shut it down. Night fell like ink. The team suited up. Mark, Ava, Mira, Henrietta, and a quiet fourth. A reformed cyber soldier named Kenji, who owed Mira his life. Ranger wore a Kevlar harness, light-mounted, movements silent as mist. They moved fast. No headlights, no radio chatter. At 2:43, they breached the outer hatch. Inside, tunnels, white tile walls, LED strips along the floor. No alarms, just a mechanical hum, like the place was breathing on its own. They reached the first chamber, rows of kennels, but not cages, pods, each one sealed, opaque, labeled by handler ID and status. D12, loop incomplete. E7, aggression maxed. D9, terminated, data stored. Ava whispered, horrified. They're harvesting behavior, uploading responses like code. Mark stared through the glass at one dog curled tight in a corner, a muzzle scarred with burns, eyes empty. Ranger growled softly. Then the lights shifted. Red. They'd been detected. Sirens pulsed, low and angry. Doors slammed shut behind them. Containment protocol activated, a voice said over hidden speakers. Mira raised her weapon. We breach forward, no turning back. Kenji hacked the first lock. Henrietta covered the hallway. Then came the first security drone, rolling steel with a stun cannon. Ranger charged it without hesitation. One leap, one bite, one shattering spark. It collapsed in pieces, and the team moved on. They didn't speak again until they reached the mainframe room. Ava slid the drive into the terminal. Kenji overrode the encryption. Data spilled like blood. Handler logs, override codes, full canine response maps, proof of conditioning, of torture, of intentional psychological collapse. Mark stared at one entry. Unit, R Alpha. Status, failed bond. Handler disposal authorized. Dog retention successful. The footage attached was of him. But it was wrong. It was doctored. They'd rewritten his survival to frame it as submission, as a win for the program. Ava whispered, "They've already packaged you. You're their poster case." Mark pulled the drive, then planted the explosives. They moved fast. Kenji triggered the countdown. 6 minutes until detonation. The facility's lighting turned hostile, strobing red and white. Warning klaxons blared, but no guards appeared. Just more automated drones, rolling from hidden panels in the walls. Henrietta took out the first two with blast shells. Mira went low, clearing a path through smoke with surgical precision. Ava kept her tablet open, one hand still syncing the last packet of data into public servers through a bouncer node in Iceland. Mark didn't look back. Ranger didn't hesitate. They reached the kennel corridor again. But this time, Mark stopped. He turned, stepping to the nearest pod. Smashed it open with the butt of his weapon. Inside, a trembling black and tan shepherd stared back, ears flat, muzzle bruised. A tracking implant glowed faintly in its neck. Mark knelt. "Hey, not your fault." The dog didn't move, not until Ranger stepped forward and pressed his nose against the glass. Then the other dog blinked, crawled out, shaking. Mark unlatched 4 more, then 6. Ava's voice rose. "We have 60 seconds. Mira stared. "We can't get them all out." "No," Mark said, "but we'll get them free." Henrietta laid down suppressive fire as Mira herded the released dogs down the exit hallway. The mainframe sparked and hissed behind them, already boiling from the internal charge planted by Kenji. As Mark reached the hatch, Ranger paused, turned, growled, just once, at the hallway behind them, then followed. The blast shook the desert. A sunburst of fire erupted from beneath the earth, sending shock waves across the ridge and up into the night sky. They watched from 2 miles away, the ops van idling, Ranger's eyes fixed on the glowing plume. Ava checked the satellite feed. Gone. Entire mainframe. Scrubbed. Mira leaned back against the tailgate. "That's one site. There'll be more." Mark nodded. "But not this one. Not again." He opened the van door and let the rescued dogs out, one by one. Some limped, some barked, some just looked around, unsure of what freedom even meant. But Ranger walked among them like an old soul, a survivor, a guide. The next morning, the footage was already circulating. Security logs, conditioning videos, handler files, with anonymous headers and undeniable timestamps. Congress couldn't deny it. The public wouldn't ignore it. Protests began within hours. Someone tried to discredit the leaks. They failed. A military dog with scars and calm eyes stood at the heart of every broadcast image. Not Mark. Ranger. The one they couldn't rewrite. The one they couldn't break. 3 days later, they were ghosts again. No press tours, no medals, just burner phones and safe houses tucked behind diners and border towns. Ranger slept easier now, but still watched the door when Mark nodded off. Ava paced in a Tucson motel room, fielding encrypted calls from a coalition of whistleblowers who'd surfaced since the leak. Former guards, lab techs, one woman from procurement who never asked where the callers went. It's unraveling, Ava told them. They can't plug every hole anymore. Henrietta sipped gas station coffee and cocked her head. Then they'll switch tactics. Go quiet. Reinvent. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, watching Ranger gnaw softly on a nylon rope toy someone had left behind. They'll rebuild, he said, but without the dogs. Yes, that week, Congress launched emergency hearings. The handler protocol became a trending phrase. Newscasters wept on air reading transcripts of canine abuse logs. One congressman demanded an immediate dismantling of PaxCor's federal contracts. But behind closed doors, the deals continued. With different names, different logos, like rot shifting under new paint. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. People began adopting. The rescued dogs, those too psychologically damaged for normal placement, were given to veterans, survivors, people who knew what trauma looked like behind a calm face. And somehow, it worked. They called it the Broken Bond Program, and it started with one dog, Ranger. Photos of him and Mark made national syndication. Just them sitting on a bench outside a clinic, sun behind them, no vests, no weapons. Just two souls that refused to be silent. One night, Ava handed Mark a flash drive. What's this? Everything we collected, uncut, unedited, all names, all files. It's yours. Burn it, bury it, or send it global. Mark took it, stared at it, then dropped it in the campfire. Some things didn't need to be leveraged. They needed to be ended. Later, as the embers cooled, Mira asked him the question they'd all danced around. Are you done? Mark looked at her, then at Ranger, curled up beside the fire, scarred muzzle twitching gently in a dream. I think I finally can be. But somewhere far off, an encrypted server pinged. New directive, Phase E, behavioral leveraging. Someone had survived, and they were already rebuilding. The night was quiet. Too quiet. Mark felt it before he saw it, an old tension, like a pressure behind the ribs. Ranger stirred from sleep, nose twitching, tail still. Ava walked in from the porch, phone to her ear. She looked pale. Someone accessed the Geneva archives, she said. 3 hours ago, the Reynolds backups. They shouldn't even exist anymore. Henrietta looked up from cleaning her rifle. Then someone rebuilt them. Mira leaned forward. Who's the IP trail lead to? Ava shook her head. Scrambled 6 ways. But the activity pattern, it's too clean, too familiar. She didn't say it. She didn't have to. PaxCor wasn't dead, just reborn. Later that night, a package arrived at their P.O. box in El Paso. No return address, wrapped in dark canvas. Inside, a photo of a handler with no name. A German Shepherd pup, barely 8 months, already showing signs of stress. A note. Phase E begins with the next generation. This time, the leash is digital. Attached was a QR code. Ava scanned it in a sandboxed device. It linked to a buried training server. Live feed, a digital behavior lab, simulating canine obedience responses through neural overlays. Remote conditioning. No handler required. Jesus, Mira whispered. They're cutting humans out of the bond entirely, going full algorithm. Mark said nothing. He just stared at the footage. Tiny dogs, crying in corners, screens flashing commands, electric tones replacing voices. Where's the site? Henrietta asked. Not listed, Ava said, but the server is pinging offshore, likely somewhere with no extradition, probably funded through ghost NGOs. Mark rose from his seat. You know what this means. Ranger sat up beside him, alert again. This doesn't stop, Mark said quietly. It just evolves. At dawn, they packed. No orders, no clear target, just coordinates traced from heartbeat patterns embedded in the footage metadata. A hidden signature left by someone on the inside. A rebel, a warning, or a trap. Didn't matter. They were going. Mira slung her pack. Henrietta loaded the drone. Ava closed her laptop, eyes hard. And Mark? He looked at Ranger, who was watching him like always. "Round 2, he said softly. Ranger licked his hand once, and they stepped into the dust again. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but because somewhere out there, another dog was waiting. And Mark Daniels was still the only man who knew how to bring them back. The freighter docked under cloud cover, late evening, east coast of Tunisia. No paperwork, no flags, just steel, salt, and silence. Mark stepped off with Ava, Mira, and Henrietta behind him, Ranger leaping down after with practiced ease. His paws hit the sand like he'd done this 100 times. Because he had. Ava checked the signal beacon. The metadata was real. It leads here, 40 miles inland. Abandoned mining town repurposed as a private animal behavior research center. No government ties, no tax records. But their power bill? Paid by an NGO run out of Luxembourg. Mira cocked her head. Luxembourg? That's PaxCor's old laundering node. Henrietta loaded a sidearm. They're getting sloppy. No, Mark said. They're getting bold. They reached the site at dusk. It was worse than they expected. Low concrete buildings stretched across the desert floor, ringed by old fences. There were cameras, but no guards. Lights were on, but no movement. Inside the first building, kennels. Sleek, sterile, white, silent, but not empty. Each kennel held a dog no older than a year, wired with biometric collars, motion sensors, retinal implants blinking faintly in the dark. No sound, Henrietta whispered. That's not right. Mira pointed to a control panel. They've muted vocal cords, digitally, sub-auditory dampeners. They're training silence, Ava realized. Silence and submission. They opened the next room. Rows of screens, video loops, flash triggers, auto feeders synced to obedience patterns, AI-generated handlers giving commands in hollow voices, and in the center, a steel chair, still warm. Someone had just left. Then the door slammed shut. Locks hissed, and a voice echoed from the speaker system. Familiar, cold, amused. Well done, Daniels. You followed the trail like a good dog. Mark's fists clenched. Dean. Roland Dean. Presumed dead. Disappeared after the original Reynolds collapse. But here he was, alive, smug, and still playing God. I always knew you were an outlier, Dean's voice continued. That's why I let you run. Phase D was never about obedience. It was about resistance. How far would the myth of the noble soldier carry when everything else collapsed? Mira raised her gun, aiming at the glass. The lights flickered. Ava hissed, "He's not here." Remote relay. But Dean kept talking. Phase E will fix the bugs, remove the variables, remove you. Then, silence. And from the floor vents, gas began to pour. Go, Mark barked. They shattered a side panel and escaped through a maintenance crawl space, Ranger dragging one of the puppies in his jaws as they ran. Outside, the entire site lit up. Self-destruct protocol. Files, labs, servers, gone in one blast. They made it back to the coastline by sunrise. The puppy, female, barely stable, curled against Ranger in the back of the van. Mark stared out at the sea, jaw tight. Dean was back, and worse. He was experimenting faster than ever. This isn't about control anymore, Mira said quietly. It's about replacement. Ava nodded. They're trying to manufacture loyalty without empathy. Henrietta checked her weapon. Then let's remind them what real loyalty looks like. Mark didn't answer. He reached into his pack, pulled out a small badge, burnt, scorched, still marked with the Pax Corps crest. He threw it into the ocean, then whispered, "Loyalty doesn't obey. It protects." And Ranger beside him didn't bark. He just stood, ready. 2 weeks passed. Dean had gone underground again, but every trail he tried to erase left a ripple, and Ava caught it. A database shard buried in the Greenland communications node pinged an old signal, R-Alpha Resurgence Protocol. It wasn't just a survival plan. It was a legacy system, a master override hidden inside a pre-existing global training archive, one that had quietly integrated into dozens of platforms, from military simulation AIs to school security systems. "They've embedded the handler logic into civilian tech," Ava whispered. "Not just dogs, humans." Henrietta's jaw clenched. "They're turning every trauma-trained responder into a potential unit." Mark stared at the node map. Each dot represented a live connection. At least 50, from police departments in the Midwest to mercenary outfits in Africa. "It's not a company anymore," he said. "It's a doctrine." They located the root node beneath a corporate shell in South Dakota, an old missile command center, repurposed as a data vault. No surface presence, fully autonomous, and buried under 6 layers of denial. But Ava had found its weak point. A satellite uplink tied to old NATO archives. If we breach it, we cut the whole backbone. They prepped fast. No reinforcements, no drones. Just the 4 of them, and Ranger. Because this time, it wasn't about exposure. It was about severance. The vault doors resisted for 12 minutes before Mira cracked the final biometric lock using Dean's old retinal print, stolen from an embassy photo in Berlin. Inside, silence. Then a voice. "Dean, again. You just don't learn, Daniels. Cut 1 head, 2 grow back." Mark stepped forward. "I'm not cutting heads," he said. He lifted a device, an analog virus, crafted by Kenji before his final op. "I'm cutting the cord." He jammed it into the uplink port. Static burst. Lights failed. The map flickered. Every node blinked once, then flatlined. Across the world, training routines froze. Drones powered down. Simulation chambers went dark. The route was dead. Suddenly, a second terminal sparked to life, hidden behind the mainframe. A backup, number A personal file, labeled K9 Echo, last entry. Ava opened it. Inside, a video. Dean, younger, smiling, and standing beside a German Shepherd puppy, Ranger. He patted the dog. "Born in control, raised in purpose. Let's see if love can outlast programming." The video ended. Mira looked at Mark. "You were never just a test case." Mark closed the screen. Number Y was the control. The proof that connection, not programming, survived. That love was the anomaly they couldn't replicate. He looked down. Ranger met his gaze, unblinking. Unbroken. Weeks passed. The world turned, quieter now, but not unchanged. The Pax Corps networks remained down. Investigations spread. Courtrooms filled. The media finally tired of Mark's face and Ranger's eyes. The public moved on, but the scars stayed. Some you wore, some you buried, and some followed you to the grave. Mark and Ranger lived off-grid now, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, where the trees were tall and the ground soft. A cabin, a creek, no news, no ghosts, just air. One morning, Ava arrived alone, holding a simple black folder. She handed it to Mark without a word. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Subject, Roland Dean, confirmed deceased. Cause of death unknown. Presumed suicide. Body unrecovered. Mira would later say she doubted it. That people like Dean didn't die alone. They died watched or replaced. Henrietta shrugged. Dead is dead. Burn the name. Mark didn't answer. He just folded the paper, fed it to the fire, and let it disappear. That night, Ranger lay at the cabin door, staring out into the trees. Quiet. Still. Mark sat beside him, watching the stars. "Remember when we first met?" he asked softly. "I thought you were too wild. You thought I was too stiff." Ranger blinked slowly. Mark smiled. "We turned out okay." He pulled a worn leather collar from his coat pocket. The original one, the first Ranger ever wore. Scarred, burnt, still intact. He placed it gently beside the dog. No leash, no tag, just memory. Ava left the next morning, her job finally done. Mira took a post with a canine rescue organization in Spain. Henrietta disappeared to the border again, where fires still flickered and someone was always in need of protection. But Mark stayed. So did Ranger. Because someone had to. Because silence didn't mean surrender. Because healing wasn't the absence of pain. It was the choice to keep going anyway. Chonde, a boy, hiked up the ridge. Lost. Tired. Eyes red. Mark found him by the trail, knees muddy, holding a scrap of paper that read, "He said the man with the scar and the dog would help." Mark didn't ask who he was. He just offered water. And Ranger? Ranger walked up slowly, sniffed the boy's hand, then lay beside him like he'd always belonged there. The boy cried, not because he was afraid, but because he wasn't anymore. And somewhere far off, a server blinked once, then went dark. For good.